From Washington is recognized, and then the gentleman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, thank you for coming here today. Your willingness to speak directly to us and to the American people about your investigation is professional, it's courageous, and it's patriotic. It's high time that the American people hear directly from you about the results of your investigation of President Donald Trump for his criminal actions leading up to and the day of January 6th, 2021. The facts, according to your report, are simple. Without a single piece of evidence, Trump sowed doubt about the 2020 election results and urged his followers to, quote, walk down to the Capitol and fight like hell on January 6th. And that's exactly what they did. Thousands of insurrectionists violently tried to stop Congress from certifying the 2020 election and doing our...
Okay, so Trump has been telling his supporters the most insane stories about what's happening in his courtrooms. And I mean truly wild stuff. He goes to rallies and describes dramatic scenes where judges are supposedly losing their minds, storming out of courtrooms, getting so flustered by Trump's brilliance that they can't handle it. He paints himself as this courtroom warrior who's so powerful, so commanding that judges literally can't deal with him. His supporters eat it up. They love the image of Trump standing up to corrupt judges and making them flee in frustration. But here's the thing, it's complete fiction, like total nonsense, because the reality of what's actually happening in these courtrooms is the exact opposite of what Trump claims. Judges aren't walking out. They're not losing control. They're not getting flustered. What's actually happening is that Trump is the one who keeps walking out. Trump is the one getting cut off mid-rant. Trump is the one whose lawyers are being threatened with jail. And judges are calmly, methodically tightening the screws on him, issuing fines, denying his motions, threatening sanctions, and grinding his cases forward toward verdicts, no matter how much he screams about it.
I was trapped in the House gallery with a small number of members that day, and I will never forget the pounding on the doors and the insurrectionists threatening to kill us right outside. My Republican colleagues keep trying to rewrite history. They claim that somehow Trump's words and actions did not legally rise to the level of criminal activity, that he did not directly cause violence at the Capitol. And so I want to set that record straight with you right now. First of all, you successfully secured indictments against Donald Trump in two major federal cases: election interference in the 2020 election and mishandling of classified documents after leaving office.
So let's talk about what Trump has been telling people versus what's actually in the court transcripts, because the contrast is absolutely stunning. Trump sends out fundraising emails claiming he stormed out of his Manhattan criminal trial. He tells rally crowds that judges are creating spectacles and losing their composure. He suggests that the courts are so corrupt, so biased, that they can't even maintain basic order when he's in the room. And his base believes it. They think Trump is winning these dramatic courtroom showdowns, that he's humiliating judges, that he's exposing the corruption of the legal system. But journalists who are actually sitting in these courtrooms, reporters from CNN, PBS, major news outlets, they're saying the proceedings are mostly subdued, that Trump's stories veer considerably from the events actually unfolding, that what he's describing bears almost no resemblance to reality. So what's really happening? Well, let's go case by case and look at what actually occurred versus what Trump claimed. First, there's the E. Jean Carroll defamation trial. This is the case where Carroll sued Trump for defaming her after she accused him of sexual assault. And during the trial, Trump told people he was so defiant, so powerful in that courtroom, that he made a statement and left like he was in control. But here's what actually happened. According to court records and PBS reporting, Judge Lewis Kaplan was getting increasingly frustrated with Trump's lawyer, Alina Habba. She kept ignoring his directions. She kept making arguments he'd already ruled on. She was borderline contemptuous. So, Judge Kaplan threatened her. He said if she didn't follow his instructions, he would hold her in contempt and possibly jail her. And right after that threat, during the plaintiff's closing argument, Trump just stood up and walked out of the courtroom. He didn't storm out victoriously. He fled, because his lawyer was about to be held in contempt and possibly jailed. And Trump realized the whole thing was going badly, so he left. But when he told the story later, he made it sound like he was making some bold statement, like he was showing the court who's boss, when in reality he was running away from a judge who was threatening to lock up his attorney. Then there's the New York civil fraud case, Judge Arthur Angeron presiding, and Trump wanted to give a closing statement. Now, defendants can sometimes address the court during closings, but there are rules. You have to agree to certain limitations. You can't just get up and rant about whatever you want. Judge Angeron told Trump's lawyers, "Mom, if Trump wants to speak, he has to agree to stay on topic and follow court rules." Trump refused. He wanted to give an unscripted speech attacking the judge, the case, the whole process. So Angeron said, "Fine, you can't speak then." But Trump did it anyway. He got up during his lawyer's closing and started delivering this blistering, off-script rant, attacking the judge, calling the case a fraud, going way beyond what was allowed. And Judge Angeron cut him off, just stopped him mid-sentence, and called a recess because Trump was violating the court's rules. And Trump later spun this as the judge losing control and fleeing the courtroom. But that's not what happened. The judge was completely in control. He cut Trump off and recessed because Trump was being contemptuous. And then court resumed, and the case proceeded exactly as the judge wanted. And then there are the fundraising emails. CNN did an analysis of Trump's campaign emails during his Manhattan criminal trial, and they found that Trump was describing courtroom spectacles and dramatic confrontations that simply weren't happening. He claimed he stormed out. He suggested there were explosive moments, but reporters in the courtroom said the proceedings were routine, mostly boring, actually. Lawyers making arguments, judges ruling on motions, witnesses testifying, normal court stuff. No drama, no explosions, no walkouts, just Trump sitting there looking angry while the case moved forward. So Trump was literally inventing a fictional version of his trials to tell his supporters, creating this narrative where he's this defiant hero standing up to corrupt judges, when the reality is he's just another defendant subject to the court's authority like anyone else. All right, so let's dig into the specific incidents where Trump's version of events completely diverges from documented reality. Okay, so let's go through these cases one by one and look at what actually happened versus what Trump claimed, because the pattern is pretty consistent. Trump tells his supporters he's dominating in court, that judges can't handle him, that he's exposing corruption and making the system crack under pressure. But the transcripts and reporting tell a completely different story. They show a defendant who's losing, who's getting sanctioned, who's watching judges systematically reject his arguments and move his cases toward conviction. So let's start with the E. Jean Carroll case. This was a defamation trial in early 2024. Carroll had already won a previous case against Trump where a jury found he sexually abused her and then defamed her. This second trial was just about additional damages for continued defamation, and Trump showed up, which was unusual because he'd skipped a lot of court appearances, but he wanted to be there for this one, probably to intimidate Carroll or make some kind of statement. But things went badly almost immediately. Trump's lawyer, Alina Habba, kept making arguments that Judge Kaplan had already ruled on. She kept trying to relitigate issues that had been decided. She kept ignoring the judge's instructions about what was and wasn't allowed. And Judge Kaplan got fed up. He's an experienced federal judge. He doesn't mess around. So he started warning Habba, telling her to stop, telling her she was violating his orders. And when she kept doing it, he threatened her. He said, "If you continue ignoring my directions, I will hold you in contempt of court, and contempt can mean jail time." So Judge Kaplan was literally threatening to lock up Trump's lawyer. And this was happening during Carroll's closing argument. The plaintiff's attorney was making her final pitch to the jury. And in the middle of that, Trump just stood up and walked out. According to PBS and other outlets that were there, Trump rose and walked out of the courtroom while the closing was still happening. He didn't wait for a break. He didn't ask permission. He just left. Now think about what that looks like from the jury's perspective. The plaintiff is making her closing argument. The judge has just threatened the defendant's lawyer, and the defendant himself gets up and leaves. That's not strength. That's not defiance. That's someone who's losing and knows it. Someone who can't even sit through the closing argument against him. But when Trump described this later, he made it sound like he made some bold statement and left on his own terms, like he was in control. When the reality is, his lawyer was about to be held in contempt, and he fled the courtroom rather than watch it happen. And by the way, the jury came back with a verdict of $83 million in damages against Trump, so his little walkout didn't exactly help him. Now let's talk about the civil fraud case with Judge Ingram. This was the case about Trump inflating the value of his properties to get better loans and insurance rates, and it went on for months with Trump occasionally showing up and making a scene. But the really dramatic moment came during closing arguments. Trump wanted to give a personal closing statement, which defendants can sometimes do, but Judge Engoron had conditions. He told Trump's lawyers that if Trump wanted to speak, he had to agree to certain limitations. He couldn't attack the judge personally. He couldn't make arguments about issues that had already been decided. He had to stay on topic and follow the court's rules. Pretty standard stuff. But Trump refused. He wanted total freedom to say whatever he wanted. So Engoron said, "Fine, then you can't give a closing statement. Your lawyer will handle it." But during his lawyer's closing, Trump apparently couldn't help himself. He stood up and started talking, just launched into this rant about how the case was a fraud, how the judge was corrupt, how the whole thing was politically motivated, and he wasn't asking permission. He wasn't following any rules, he was just going off. And Judge Engoron let him talk for a minute, probably to avoid looking like he was silencing Trump. And then he cut him off, just stopped him mid-sentence and said, "That's enough, we're taking a recess." And the court recessed, and when they came back, the case proceeded normally. The judge issued his ruling. Trump lost. He was ordered to pay hundreds of millions in penalties. But Trump later described this as the judge losing control, as Engoron being so flustered by Trump's speech that he had to flee and call a recess, when what actually happened is the judge maintained control. He let Trump speak briefly. Then he cut him off when Trump violated the court's rules, and the case moved forward exactly as the judge intended. This is the pattern in all of Trump's cases. He creates this fictional narrative where he's winning, where judges are scared of him, where the system is collapsing under the weight of his defiance. But the reality is, judges are just doing their jobs. They're ruling on motions. They're managing courtroom behavior. They're moving cases forward. And when Trump acts out, they sanction him, they fine him, they threaten him with worse consequences, and they keep grinding the cases toward conclusions. Now let's talk about the Manhattan criminal trial, the hush money case. This was the trial where Trump was ultimately convicted on 34 felony counts. And throughout the trial, Trump was sending out fundraising emails to his supporters describing what was happening in court. And according to CNN's analysis, these emails bore almost no resemblance to reality. Trump claimed he was storming out of proceedings. He described courtroom spectacles. He suggested there were dramatic confrontations. But journalists sitting in the courtroom said none of that was happening. What was actually happening was pretty mundane. Prosecutors were presenting evidence, witnesses were testifying, Trump's lawyers were cross-examining them. The judge was ruling on objections and motions. It was a normal criminal trial, boring even for long stretches. Trump would sit there looking annoyed. Sometimes he'd fall asleep. But there were no dramatic walkouts, no explosions, no spectacles, just the slow, grinding machinery of a criminal prosecution. But Trump needed to keep his supporters engaged. He needed them to think he was fighting heroically against overwhelming corruption. So he invented a version of the trial that was more exciting, more dramatic, more consistent with his image as a persecuted hero. And his supporters believed it because they weren't in the courtroom. They were getting their information from Trump's emails and his rally speeches, so they had no way to know he was lying. And then there's what Judge Merchant did in that case, because Trump's lawyers kept filing motions for mistrial, motions to recuse the judge, motions to delay the trial, motions to throw out evidence, and Judge Mon rejected almost all of them. He called Trump's arguments entirely meritless. He said Trump's attacks on him and his family were inappropriate. He issued gag orders to stop Trump from attacking witnesses and court staff. And when Trump violated those gag orders, Merchant held him in contempt. He fined him thousands of dollars, and he warned that if the violations continued, he would consider jail. So Judge Merchant wasn't losing control. He was tightening control. He was showing Trump that the court's authority would be enforced, that Trump would face consequences for his behavior. And the trial moved forward on Merchant's schedule, not Trump's. And it ended with a conviction. 34 felony counts, Trump found guilty by a jury of his peers. So, for all of Trump's bluster about dominating the courtroom, he lost completely. Now, here's what's really significant about all of this. Trump's base believes his version of events. They think he's winning in court. They think judges are corrupt and incompetent. They think the whole system is collapsing because Trump is exposing it. But none of that is true. Trump is losing in court. He's been convicted. He's been found liable in civil cases. He's been fined. He's facing hundreds of millions in penalties. And judges aren't fleeing or losing control. They're calmly, methodically holding him accountable. So there's this massive disconnect between the reality of Trump's legal situation and what his supporters think is happening. And Trump is deliberately creating that disconnect. He's lying to his base about what's happening in court because the truth that he's losing, that he's being held accountable, that judges are in control, that truth doesn't fit his narrative. So he invents a new narrative, one where he's the hero and the judges are the villains, and his supporters buy it because they want to believe it. But here's the problem for Trump. The court transcripts exist, the rulings are public, the verdicts are documented. So anyone who actually looks at the evidence can see he's lying, can see that his courtroom hero stories are fiction. And that matters because it shows Trump's entire defense strategy is built on propaganda, not on actual legal arguments. He's not winning in court, he's losing. But he's winning the PR battle with his base by lying about what's happening. And that works until it doesn't, until the verdicts come in, until the penalties have to be paid, until the appeals run out and the judgments are enforced, and then reality catches up. And no amount of lying can change the fact that Trump lost, that he was held accountable, that judges maintained control and enforced the law. All right, so let's talk about what this pattern of lying about courtroom events means for Trump's credibility and his legal strategy going forward. Okay, so let's step back and look at what it means that Trump is consistently lying about what happens in his courtrooms. Because this isn't just about individual incidents, this is about Trump's entire approach to his legal problems. And it's about whether his strategy of creating a fictional narrative can actually save him. So let's break down why this matters. Point 1. Trump's courtroom lies show he knows he's losing. Because if Trump were actually winning in court, he wouldn't need to make up stories. He could just tell the truth. He could say, hey, we got this motion granted. The judge ruled in our favor. We're making progress. But he can't say that because he's not winning. He's losing. Judges are rejecting his arguments. Juries are convicting him. Courts are imposing massive penalties. So Trump has to invent a different reality where he's the hero, where judges are scared of him, where the system is crumbling, because the actual reality that he's being held accountable by a functioning legal system is too devastating to admit. So the lies are basically Trump's confession that he knows he's in trouble, that he knows the courts are closing in on him, and he's desperately trying to maintain his image with his base, even as he loses in court. Point 2. The disconnect between Trump's stories and reality is creating a dangerous situation, because Trump's supporters believe his version of events. They think judges are corrupt. They think the trials are rigged. They think Trump is being persecuted. And when you convince millions of people that the legal system is illegitimate, that creates real problems. Some of those supporters send threats to judges. Some of them show up at court sisters to intimidate people. Some of them might even resort to violence to defend Trump. And all of that is based on lies, based on Trump's fictional accounts of courtroom drama that never happened. So Trump's propaganda isn't just about fundraising or maintaining his image. It's actually undermining faith in the judicial system. It's making his supporters think that any verdict against Trump must be corrupt. And that's incredibly dangerous for democracy because rule of law depends on people accepting court decisions even when they don't like them. But Trump is teaching his base to reject any decision that goes against him, to see judges as enemies instead of as neutral arbiters. And that mindset is corrosive. Point 3. Judges are losing patience and tightening the screws. Because Trump's behavior in court, the rants, the walkouts, the attacks on judges and their families, it's not going unpunished. Judges are responding. They're issuing gag orders, they're holding Trump in contempt, they're finding him, they're threatening jail. They're denying his endless motions for delays and mistrials, and they're making it clear that Trump doesn't get special treatment, that he's subject to the same rules as any other defendant. So while Trump tells his supporters that judges are losing control, the reality is judges are tightening their control. They're showing Trump that courtroom theatrics won't save him, that propaganda won't change legal outcomes, that at the end of the day, evidence and law matter more than Trump's ability to spin a story. And that's terrifying for Trump, because his whole life he's been able to talk his way out of problems, to settle lawsuits, to declare bankruptcy and walk away. But you can't just spin your way out of a criminal conviction. You can't bankruptcy your way out of hundreds of millions in civil penalties. The legal system is finally holding him accountable in ways he can't escape. Point 4. Trump's lies are going to collapse when enforcement begins. Because right now, Trump can tell whatever stories he wants. He can claim he's winning. He can say judges are scared of him. And his supporters believe it because the cases are ongoing. But at some point, these cases conclude. Verdicts become final. Appeals run out, and enforcement begins. Trump has to pay the penalties. He might have to serve prison time if he loses his immunity protections. His properties might get seized to satisfy judgments. And when that happens, when the reality of his legal losses becomes impossible to ignore, his propaganda narrative collapses. Because you can't claim you're winning when your assets are being seized. You can't claim judges are scared of you when you're being sentenced. So Trump is living on borrowed time, using lies to maintain an illusion of strength. But that illusion will shatter the moment real consequences start hitting him. So, what happens next? First, watch for more contempt rulings because judges are clearly fed up with Trump's behavior, the gag order violations, the courtroom rants, the attacks on judges and their families. We've already seen contempt findings and fines, but judges have warned that jail is on the table if Trump keeps pushing. So, if Trump keeps violating orders, expect judges to escalate. Maybe house arrest, maybe actual jail time for contempt. And if that happens, Trump's whole tough guy image collapses because there's no way to spin being jailed for contempt as winning. Second, watch the enforcement of judgments. Trump owes hundreds of millions of dollars in civil penalties from the fraud case, from the Carroll cases, from other lawsuits, and those judgments are going to be enforced. That means seizing assets if Trump doesn't pay, putting liens on properties, forcing sales. And when that happens, when Trump's wealth starts getting taken to pay judgments, it's going to be very hard for him to maintain his image as a successful billionaire who's winning against the system. The reality of his losses will be undeniable. Third, watch how his base reacts when reality contradicts his narrative. Because at some point, Trump supporters are going to have to reconcile what he's been telling them with what's actually happening. When he's convicted, when he's sentenced, when his appeals fail, when penalties are enforced, they'll have to decide. Do we admit we were lied to, or do we double down and claim the entire system is so corrupt that even final judgments don't matter? Some will probably admit Trump lied, but many will double down, and that's when things could get really dangerous. Because if Trump's most devoted followers decide that no court decision is legitimate, they might decide to take matters into their own hands. And fourth, watch whether media starts fact-checking Trump's courtroom claims more aggressively. Because right now, Trump says whatever he wants about his trials, and a lot of outlets just report it without much pushback. But as the gap between his stories and reality becomes more obvious, maybe more journalists will start saying, wait, that's not what happened. Here's what actually occurred. And if that happens, if Trump starts getting fact-checked in real time on his courtroom lies, it becomes harder for him to maintain the propaganda narrative. Here's the bottom line. Trump keeps screaming about judges walking out and losing control. But the reality is, Trump is the one walking out. Trump is the one getting cut off mid-rant. Trump is the one whose lawyers are being threatened with jail. Judges are calmly, methodically doing their jobs, issuing rulings, enforcing orders, moving cases toward conclusions, and holding Trump accountable despite all his theatrics. So Trump's courtroom hero stories are pure fiction, created to keep his base engaged and to maintain the illusion that he's winning. But he's not winning. He's losing on every front in every case. And the judges aren't scared. They're in control. And they're making sure Trump faces consequences for his actions. No matter how loud he screams, no matter how many lies he tells his supporters, no matter how many times he tries to rewrite reality, the court transcripts don't lie. The rulings are public, the verdicts are final, and Trump lost. All right, that's the reality behind Trump's courtroom propaganda. He tells his supporters judges are walking out and losing control, but judges are actually tightening their grip on him, issuing fines, threatening jail, denying his motions, and moving his cases toward accountability. And Trump can't stop it. All he can do is lie about it and hope his base doesn't notice. Make sure you're subscribed because we're going to keep tracking every Trump courtroom lie. Every moment judges shut him down, every time reality contradicts his propaganda narrative. Hit that notification bell. Join the newsletter. Because as Trump's legal walls close in, his lies are going to get more desperate and more obvious. And we're going to be here exposing every single one. This is just the beginning.